Welcome to a Trekzone conversation. It is time once again to talk Trek with Lee Sargent. Lee, welcome back to the show, buddy.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
Now, we last did this one in May. We ended up talking about Dr. Crusher and that space ghost. That was off the cuff. So let's see how we go today with Deep Space Nine, next week with Voyager, and the week after with Enterprise. And then the week after that, It's Star Trek Las Vegas time. I can't believe that that is finally come around again.
Yeah, it seems like it only seems like a couple of months ago that it was on. So because I mean, all of Star Trek Twitter, of course, turns to Las Vegas. So
it's exactly right. Well, and who knows what we're going to be teased with at this convention with Picard coming up and the next season of Discovery, which we are going to get into here on Talkin Trek. But, you know, last year was the big focus on Deep Space Nine's 25th, which is a nice little segue into today's topic, which is, of course, the second spin-off of the franchise, or the third, depending if you include the animated series in that. And a couple of firsts. We had Avery Brooks, an African-American, as our lead character. We were not on a starship. We were on a space station. It was dark. It was gritty. It was tough on the first viewing for this young Trekkie. How about yourself?
No, I actually embraced Deep Space Nine immediately when it first came out, because Emissary is such a strong pilot episode, and I remember it was just a completely different vibe and feel, which I think any show will get crucified for now, but back then I actually, I was kind of ready. I didn't want a clone of Next Generation or even of original Star Trek, and what they came up with was, it was fresh. It was really, really, and this is weird kind of saying this 25 years later, and I still get those feelings when I watch that first episode. There's some beats of music that will always be ingrained in me as a setting for a new Star Trek and a new place to kind of explore the final frontier and stuff. Deep Space Nine did not give me any drama at all, and the internet wasn't around, so I was not aware of anyone else's drama with it, if there were some.
I think that's the biggest thing right now with Discovery as well, that the darker tone that Discovery took, it's very, very similar to the tone that DS9 took with coming off TNG. And I mean, you don't even have to sort of think about the characters, the plots, or anything like that. All you need to do is put an episode of DS9 on after TNG, and to go from those brightly lit sets of the Enterprise D to the dark greys of the Cardassian station. That right there just hits you in the face immediately that this is a completely different show. And it's something that actually took me a second viewing to fully appreciate all the minutiae that comes into it and the level of detail that writer's room came up with.
I think even with even battling the powers that be, who were all determined that every episode had to be standalone and can be shown out of order and all that type of stuff, I think from the get-go, this show was setting a different way of storytelling in the Star Trek universe. Even from the point of view of introducing in the first episode the fact that Cisco is the emissary of the Bajorans. That was always going to be a storyline that you couldn't just go, okay, well, we'll set that on the shelf now and not deal with it. He was always going to be the emissary, and it was always going to be ongoing.
Yeah.
And it was a matter of, whilst you could, in Next Generation, you certainly had growth of characters. You had Riker's beard from one season to another. So the costumes, they flowed on, but you could pick an episode from any season and kind of watch it without a drama. Whereas Deep Space Nine is like, you jump in and you go, all right, because this is the point where Nog's already done this, or this is the point where Rom's, married Lita, stuff like that. Stuff continuously grew on the show, and that was just natural. And I think rather than fighting to include that, which I know they did, but it almost feels from the other side of the point of view that they were fighting for it to not be doing that. And that was such a one-sided fight because it was always going to be like the premise of the show just delivered it automatically. And then when they were actually able to do stuff in the story arc, just wonderful.
And that was the biggest departure, I think, from DS9, from the franchise that it had been. We weren't going to places to find a story. The stories were coming to us, and the same people were coming back to the station. Gul Dukat, Nog, Rom, they weren't coming back to the station, but they were coming back to our cast of the week.
Yeah.
The development of the minor characters, dare I say, I think was second to none on television at the time, to the point now where people still want to know what happened. And the guest stars of Deep Space Nine, I think, more so than the other franchises, are more prevalent at conventions and are more wanted at conventions, that because we grew with these characters over 7 years.
Well, it 100% makes sense because, I mean, the way that the show was set up, it just lent itself to that. So there was always going to be Morn in the bar, because if you had different people in there all the time.
Morn.
Yeah. If you had different people in there all the time, it would take away the feeling of the station. And so, it was a matter of you had to have a consistent feel of kind of who was there and who were the players. Otherwise, it didn't feel like they weren't, like with the Enterprise, you go to a different planet every day type of thing. And so different guest stars, different specialists on board, all that type of stuff. Whereas with Deep Space Nine itself was very much, I mean, they talk about the Enterprise being a character. Well, Deep Space Nine, the station, was very much a character in itself. And these characters had to inhabit that. And I think also it was interesting because we even had like a death of a major character towards the end, obviously, that they still had to do something with. You couldn't, it still had to feel like home. So that place was now the place that Jadzia died. And so when Ezri came in, there was a huge legacy for that. Whereas in kind of other shows, like Stargate, for instance, there's an episode where Dr. McKay in Stargate Atlantis, he breaks up with his girlfriend, or, in fairly traumatic kind of circumstances. And the very next episode, he's kind of making jokes about hitting on the local women and stuff in the next planet. And it was really, particularly if you binge the show, it's very off-putting because it's like, well, there's your ship in the bottle kind of, every episode's its own universe. And Deep Space Nine didn't have that vibe. Even when they were being forced to do standalone episodes, they were still being subversive in the fact that, they would remember things from the previous episodes.
Yeah. And I mean, even to the point of, you mentioned Morn, he gets his own episode when he fakes his own death. Quark gets his own episode, even though he is part of the main cast. He very much is, he's the barkeep, he's the B-list of characters, if you will. And he gets his own episode and his own story arc, marrying Greta, the Klingon, the wife of the Klingon that he kills in the bar. And that's, that was an episode from last season, and it just happened to work because Worf comes on the show. We've got to have a Klingon episode, and he's off put by this lowly Ferengi that has more luck in Klingon love than he does.
Well, I think also bringing up Worf, that's another great example of the reason why this show was so strong, is that it could accommodate Worf coming in the show without kind of disrupting the whole balance of the show. Had you introduced a new, like they did that with Ensign Ro in Next Generation. They tried to introduce, an ongoing new character, and she never, like, people love her, and like I love her too, but I mean, she was never being elevated to that main cast, and so that was a shame that they never committed to that, of saying, well, we have Ensign Ro, she's been here for about a season, let's elevate her to full status and do more with her. Like, let's lock this actress in. And of course, I know that they offered Major Kira's role originally they wrote it as Ensign Ro, which would have been interesting, but I'm kind of happy that we got to meet Kira.
And someone else. Yeah, I think it was Michelle Forbes originally didn't want to commit to the 6-year contract in that character. But as you say, I mean, we got another perspective on the Bajorans, and we really sort of... The introduction on TNG as almost terrorist-like or refugee terrorists, freedom fighters, to really have that already there and established for Emissary is just incredible and really a testament to the Berman era of production in how they just worked everything through, even so much so as DS9 setting up Voyager with the 2-part Marquee episode. To have that as well and to... it's very common now, especially with the NCIS franchise. The amount of backdoor pilots, the backdoor pilot for NCIS was in JAG, and so on and so forth. And they've even done two or three others.
But I'll remind you that this isn't a new thing though for Star Trek, because back in with Gary Seven in original series Star Trek, they tried to backdoor a pilot into Assignment Earth. So it's in the DNA definitely, but I think done in a much more organic manner. Even Deep Space Nine's introduction to Voyager was done in a much more organic manner than, hey, look, there's new characters in this episode, or we're going to introduce one new I've been rewatching Beverly Hills 90210, and don't ask me, it is what it is. And Beverly Hills 90210, of course, famously had the Melrose Place spin-off, and I think they had some other kind of there was another show that they had a spin-off of. But what they would do is they would introduce a character and make them a love interest for like three episodes or 4 episodes towards the end of a season, and then they would show up in the new show. I think that they that it was the expanding universe that they were kind of working with. So this is the thing. I just didn't find Deep Space Nine controversial at the start. And again, we touched on that because of the lack of internet, I suspect. But it just felt like a natural... Like, the Enterprise was still active. You couldn't have another Enterprise show. And going on to another ship felt weird, but obviously, it worked eventually. So, I think Deep Space Nine, it's not my favourite show of Star Trek, and I can't really answer why not, because there's nothing... I don't feel anything wrong with it. And I actually quite enjoy the first season of it. And a lot of people will criticize the first season of Deep Space Nine quite heavily. And of course, there are a couple of episodes in there which are harder to swallow than others. But I actually enjoyed those first kind of episodes of the station is in disarray and them putting it together, and how Starfleet responds in not their natural environment, which I think was the important element of the show that I was really interested in.
On the next Trekzone conversation, Lee and I dive into the writing of the show and discover that our tastes on certain episodes are different. But that's okay, because there's so much to love about Deep Space Nine. In the meantime, get exclusive access to podcasts, behind-the-scenes info, uncut editions of the show, and this month's Talkin Trek eps in full by becoming a member on Patreon today. Support Australia's unofficial home of Star Trek. Get even better with membership starting at just $1 a month. Jump over to patreon.com/TrekZone.org.au. You can also get social with Trekzone. Australia's unofficial home of Star Trek is everywhere you are. Get the wrap-up on our Facebook page, keep in the loop on Twitter, and relive Trek episodes on Instagram. Plus, you can catch the latest podcasts on your favourite podcasting app. And new content is being added all the time to Trekzone's YouTube channel, Talkin Science with Dr. Brad Tucker on Tuesdays, Trekzone Live on Thursdays after the Vegas or Bust tour, and a Trekzone Conversation on Saturdays. Don't miss a moment, subscribe and ring the bell to be the first to know about new eps. We'll see you tomorrow when Lee and I continue our discussion of DS9.